For today's episode, we're featuring a discussion between Samo and I about populism's evolving role in modern politics, exploring how social media, administrative power, and popular movements shape democracy. From Trump's political strategy to the future of both parties, we examine whether populist victories can translate into lasting governmental change and what it means for the emerging era of digital democracy. If you want to understand how modern populism actually works beyond the surface level headlines, this is a must-listen conversation.
Hello.
Oh, hey, Erik.
Hey, Samo. How are you doing?
Pretty good. So let's talk about the challenges and the strengths and limitations of populism as a political strategy.
Yeah, let's get into it. You know, it's fascinating. There's this famous Steve Bannon interview where he's in Oxford talking to students, the PBS interview, and they're saying, hey, Trump is this, the end of democracy. And he's saying, the end of democracy, there are more people voting than ever before. And they say, oh, democracy isn't just people voting. And he's saying, oh, I'm a simple guy. I think democracy, I think people voting. But, it just goes to this idea of democracy is when people vote for the candidate who people want to win. Populism is when, people vote for the candidate that you don't want to win. But it seems like what Ben was also talking about is what happened in the US is kind of happening all throughout Europe and other places in the world, which is sort of the rise of this, populist movement. And he's been trying to stoke it. So why don't you give some context for this and let's unpack further what's actually happened here, what's happening.
Well, it's my wonderful democracy versus your corrupt populism, obviously. And that's always the standard, right? And I think that the right also had its own critique of certain very popular movements that happened in, let's say, the third world. So here's perhaps the surprising point here. When Hugo Chavez ascended to power, for the political context of his country, he was kind of a populist. He was sort of proposing, hey, let's increase living standards. Let's do things differently internationally. Let's commune with Simón Bolívar. Actually, I'm leaving a seat open for Simón Bolívar at every presidential meeting. And that sounds like, mildly insane. It's like, does he think he's communing with the dead? No, he's just sort of appealing to this kind of concrete national mythology that the country in question has. And I think a factor that underlines populism that is, I think, basically sort of universal is this appeal to popular sentiment. Now, popular sentiment can be right or it can be wrong. I happen to think that a lot of popular sentiment on questions like free speech or the challenges of how to process immigration, I think it's correct. But in the case of Venezuela, it was not correct in terms of what to do with the extremely well functioning before takeover oil company. And I think that the view there is that you acquire power or popular mandate through basically popular support. So populism is democratic power most directly understood. And it has been a strategy that we have seen throughout political history. We started talking about it in the last decade or so. But if you look at basically any historical republic, you could have the optimates and the populares, right? As you had in the Roman Republic. And you could have your own version of, say, 19th century version of, say, the culture war and so on. What is perhaps different, though, is that I think the last time populism was truly used, when the popular mandate was the basis of political reform, the sort of opponent of populism was just basically feudalism or almost monarchy. If you look at 1848 in Europe, or even 1776 in the United States, the popular mandate legitimates a break with the previous establishment and its replacement. And say in the American case, it's not quite a rebellion against feudalism. I think it's more sort of like a breaking from a kind of mercantilist republic, a merchant republic, crowned one, but still in creation of a new republic. And I think in the European case of 1848, with the revolutions in Germany, France, etc., there it's more straightforward, the toppling of feudalism. And I think what's different is that for the first time ever, democracy is fighting the 20th century administrative bureaucratic state. people do not understand how extensive and expansive modern states are. If you compare the United States today versus 1900, you could sort of fund a 1900 sized state through tariffs, and you didn't even need an income tax. There was no income tax, actually. You cannot fund a state that's sort of half of GDP in that way. Though, of course, there are people who float an idea of a return to that. I think Donald Trump's been playing around with that idea, or at least mentioning it in the U.S. context. So the balance of power is profoundly different from when democracy or a democratic force reshaped politics last. So the balance of power politically in an 18th century state, in an American colonial context, is already different from a 19th century fragmented small European state that just started industrializing, like a place like Bavaria, for example, right? Or a place even like, in a way, France, which is a bit bigger. And that's very different from a place where the administrative state already exists. Now, the interesting part of this is that arguably populism is sort of what created the administrative state in the first place, or rather wrote the political check that allowed this state to exist. There's this whole forgotten period of early 20th century American politics where, you have politicians like Huey Long. I think it's like probably decently correct to describe Huey Long as a populist, right? He was the governor of Louisiana from 1928 to 1932. And then he was a senator for another 3 years. He basically assembled, with popular mandate, a full-on political machine. And this was driven with a kind of redistributionist agenda. And at the end of the day, FDR's America, while it had significant elitist elements, was also populist in the most straightforward sense of like promising people things that they wanted, right? Basically, it was supposed to alleviate the aftermath of the Great Depression. Once the administrative state was assembled, there was this long history of sort of tweaking it from like the 1940s all the way to the present era. You could consider it sort of like a seamless transition from the Cold War era to the post 1990s neoliberal, fully globalized era. So you have like the Cold War period, where it's basically the military industrial complex on steroids, complex game of international diplomacy. And then post 1990s, it's sort of this attempt to basically allow enough economic growth to fund the massive states that have come into existence, right? So I think for a while in the 1990s, that seemed to kind of work. Even in places like Britain that have since fallen off, it seemed like economic growth would be fast enough that the ever-increasing spending would be balanced, but this seems less and less likely over time. So eventually, I think Europe will have to basically abandon the kind of social democratic model. But the social democratic model is just a variant of the administrative state. Like I said, the sort of national security state, the like hyper-bureaucratized, hyper-regulatory agency of Washington, D.C., have in a deep philosophical sense a closer similarity to Brussels than they do to 19th century American governance. And I think that sort of brings us to the paradox. The national myths of not just the United States, but all liberal democracies were made in a time before there was a bureaucratic, entrenched establishment. And now there has been one for 80 years. So will the same tactics actually work against it? Unclear. It's clear it can win elections, right? Arguably, politically, let me give an example of a cultural win and maybe a political win, where I think that, say, Viktor Orban in Hungary has not managed to solve the fundamental problems Hungary faces. Hungary's economic growth is no better than, say, Poland or other Eastern European countries. The migration is a bit lower. They're interested in expanding nuclear power, but haven't done so already. Yet at every level of government, the main conservative party sort of has a profound bench of people working in government. So Hungarian government is not smaller than, say, Polish government or Czech government, but it's staffed by cultural conservatives. So they tend to focus on things that promote basically a middle-class lifestyle. Even when we think of something like the child subsidies there are given in the form of like extra loans for a car and like discounts on baby car seats and tax breaks. So very much in a way aimed at developing not just higher fertility, but like just a middle-class society, right? That Hungarian conservatives that are modestly pro-market, modestly socially conservative, not even that religious, somewhat nationalist would like. So that's perhaps a cultural win. It's not a developmental win. And it involves the co-opting of the administrative state by Fidesz slowly, painstakingly with Orban's reforms. They have not yet succeeded at raising fertility, by the way, despite that being sort of the flagship policy. They've raised fertility a little, and every little bit helps. But while spending several percentages of GDP, they have not managed to get it above replacement. Now, arguably, it's totally worth it because 100% of GDP only exists because people are there, right? 100% of GDP is because of the humans who live there. But still, so I would call that a cultural win. But then I'll give an example of populist failure, which was successfully mobilizing against the bureaucratic and political establishment of a vote for Brexit in Britain. And Brexit did happen, but I don't think the outcome is one the population is happy with. And I don't think Britain then charted a new course. There was no British Renaissance after. For a little bit, it seemed like there might be. So we see here that like merely winning an election does not automatically result in either figuring out an alternate political economy. It might just result in you picking up the same sort of big government approach and making that the foundation of your power. And it remains kind of middling, not necessarily that effective. Or it might result in events changing, but you didn't even defeat the old establishment. Like Brexit did not actually change the British establishment or break it in any way. I'm, of course, raising these in context of Donald Trump's recent election win, where I think many people are very excited about the possibilities of the future. I mean, I am hopeful, but I'm noting that these outcomes exist, right? We have political science case studies where even a big electoral win, seemingly driving a big change, kind of dissipates when hitting administrative power and like deep bench of people to hire from the opposite team. And you can call them unelected, and it's true. But what are you going to do? They have government salaries and authority, and they can disobey your orders. And sometimes the courts are on their side.
Right. And then there's a question, we alluded to it in our last conversation of, okay, so you could either rebuild the bench from scratch, but then there's a question of, is it possible that the existing sort of officials can be converted in a sense? And, in 2016, this was unfathomable because the resistance was so strong. The ideological sort of hatred of Trump was so strong. But 8 years later, it seems like there's been this preference falsification wave where a bunch of people who are secretly supporting him for a bunch of years, or at least people who are neutral towards him, can now say so. And maybe now we'll have, people who served Biden or who wouldn't have served Trump 8 years ago, maybe they'd have no problem serving Trump now. It feels like the resistance just isn't as strong. Do you see that is?
I think they will be more cooperative to a great degree, but I don't think, say, Elizabeth Warren and her allies would easily give up. And if I count the number of live players, it's sort of like, I think the Democrats actually have more. The Democratic Party has more, and the US deep state has more. I mean, the other side, of course, Trump plus Elon, you should never underestimate that. That's pretty amazing. And Elon seems to be, at least for now, like more obviously influential than, say, perhaps Peter Thiel might have been in the 2016 administration, in the 2016 election. That might have been a more subtle form of influence. And perhaps it's related to the fact that X.com is a form of populist power at this point. He can shine the spotlight of public opinion on all sorts of problems, all sorts of issues that otherwise would not have gotten airtime. Like in 2016, there was no comparable social media network, any, right?
Right. I mean, if Elon said, hey, I'm doing this fellowship where I'm going to take 1,000 people, the best people in sort of business, tech, whatever, to, work at the White House for a year or two alongside me, I bet he'd get some great people applying.
Of course, but would he do it? And can they be confirmed? Will the GOP actually cooperate, for example, with Elon Musk? Very unclear. Like, the significant chunks of the Republican Party are still deeply hostile to Trump. So they are not even enabling him politically. He is not in a position of close alliance as, for example, between Fidesz in Hungary and Viktor Orban. Orban built that party over many years from scratch. It wasn't like a hostile takeover, right? And the problem is Trump ran a hostile takeover in 2016. The voters love him, but a lot of this deep Republican establishment doesn't. And, you can have examples of people who cannot be confirmed and are then given this title of a czar. Okay, what is a czar? Well, you have an office in the White House and you have the power to convene people.
Yeah.
Okay, you convene the people for whatever bureau you're supposed to handle, like immigration. You talk at them, you tell them the president really wants this. They hear you, they nod, and then they go back across the street and go to back to their office, and they do whatever they wanted to do. So the difficulty here is that not having the direct authority to remove people or manage people is a severe impediment. And I think the confirmation process will be contested from within the Republican Party. And you might ask, well, why would the Republican Party pass up this perfectly fine opportunity to carry out a program similar to what I said? Again, the Viktor Orban program in Hungary, where you appoint people, you fire opponents, maybe you shrink the size of government a little bit, maybe you reduce the number of civil servants by a great degree, maybe with Elon's help at identifying things. Maybe you just do it, assign all the people each their own department and relevant agenda. However, they do not see a Trump administration and embedding into the deep state as a win for them. They see it as a win for Trump, and they see it as a win for Elon. While they might like Elon, I guarantee you Republicans probably see him as an outsider, the Republican insiders. They don't like him any better. So I think if he could get through confirmation a bunch of people from tech and from government, this would work very well. It would work better than the Orban strategy.
Hey, we'll continue our interview in a moment after a word from our sponsors. Hey everyone, Erik here. In this environment, founders need to become profitable faster and do more with smaller teams, especially when it comes to engineering. That's why Sean Lenihan started Squad, a specialized global talent firm for top engineers that will seamlessly integrate with your org. Squad offers rigorously vetted top 1% talent that will actually work hard for you every day. Their engineers work in your time zone, follow your processes, and use your tools. Squad has front-end engineers excelling in TypeScript, React, and Next.js ready to onboard to your team today. For backend, Squad engineers are experts at Node.js, Python, Java, and a range of other languages and frameworks. While it may cost more than the freelancer on Upwork billing you for 40 hours, but working only 2, Squad offers premium quality at a fraction of the typical cost, without the headache of assessing for skills and culture fit. Squad takes care of sourcing, legal compliance, and local HR for global talent. Increase your velocity without amping up burn. Visit choosesquad.com and mention Turpentine to skip the waitlist. Like many of you, I spend a good chunk of my day managing emails and phone calls. And despite being careful about where I share my contact info, somehow the robocalls keep multiplying and my inbox is flooded with spam. It turns out there's a reason for this. Data brokers. These companies don't just collect basic contact info. They're gathering everything from your social security number and financial records to your shopping habits and employment history. Some health insurance companies are now working with data brokers to track your online activity, which could actually affect your insurance rates. Another huge privacy risk are people search sites. These websites publish detailed profiles about you, including your home address, family members' information, and even sensitive details like religious beliefs or political affiliations. This got me thinking about how exposed we all are. Whether you're sending a wire transfer, want to protect against identity theft, or just trying to keep your family's personal details private, that's why I started using Incogni. Here's what makes it different. They automatically handle 5 different types of data brokers: marketing, recruitment, financial information, risk mitigation brokers, and those people search sites. Instead of you having to track down all these companies yourself, and trust me, there are hundreds, Incogni contacts them on your behalf and demands they remove your information. And here's the key. They keep monitoring and removing your data automatically because these brokers often try to collect it again. Incogni protects your data across all your devices, whether you're working from home, a coffee shop, or anywhere with public Wi-Fi. Plus, you can add up to 4 additional family members under their family and friends plan. And they're so confident you'll see the difference in your day-to-day, they offer a 30-day money-back guarantee. Take your personal data back with Incogni. Use code MOMENT at the link below and get 60% off an annual plan. That's incogni.com/moment.
Now, let me explain why. I think the Orban program is kind of basically a socially conservative program where you're basically appealing to the Hungarian baby boomer and you're appealing to their preconceptions. And in a way, there is no deep bench of highly educated, intelligent people. You have highly intelligent people in business, in tech, who, however, have very little political experience. That is not necessarily bad, but only if you can replace wholesale aspects of the function of the previous political establishment. As soon as you are in a room, let's put it this way, Marco Rubio, does that sound like a name that's like a very different foreign policy?
No, I think people are really frustrated or annoyed that it seems like business as usual or confused as to why he picked Rubio.
I think it's just the Republican Party. I don't even think it's the donors. Like Donald Trump received significant crypto donations. By the way, I do believe this is a reason to be bullish on crypto, not investment advice, but I do in fact think that, even at the end of the day, while Lina Khan was not ideal, Lina Khan was was not terrible. And then now, in fact, it's very likely that they'll try to replace FTC and so on. So I expect the US to take a number of stances that are going to be very positive on crypto. And Elon, of course, is pro-crypto. So I think that'll do well. And, in a way, it's cool that you allow Elon to sue. What was it? The Federal Aviation, I forget, the FAA? Is that?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's cool that you can sue the FAA and that they let up on making you chase down SEALs and torture them with sounds of rocket launches. Did you see that?
Yeah.
Where they had to demonstrate how distressed the SEALs are. So you have to kind of abduct a SEAL and it had to play this audio. That was kind of insane. But that's cool. But wouldn't it be even cooler if you tasked the FAA directly to increase the number of launches? That their mandate and their new KPI is the number of successful launches. That's cooler, right? And I think to do that, you need someone to run the thing and you need to fire a bunch of people. And, I think that the call could be made. And the key question is, can they get it through the Republican Party? So I think perhaps not to Donald Trump's surprise, because I'm sure he's seen this before, but perhaps to Elon's surprise, in about a month or two, it'll turn out that the biggest obstacle to any great dreams of reforming the American government he has at this point will be the ostensible allies of the Republican Party, right? Because you can't convince me that it's not, let's say the Marco Rubio appointment is not straightforwardly the Republican Party business as usual. And the Republican Party business as usual, I kind of don't massively care if they run the country or if the Democratic Party business as usual run the country, because I think while some things will be slightly different, it's much like Hungary, right? It doesn't outperform the counterfactual that much, right? Slightly more balanced budget, maybe slightly higher fertility. You get to the same place, you're just going with a slower speed.
Hey, we'll continue our interview in a moment after a word from our sponsors. Let's talk about scaling digital commerce for a moment. When Mr. Beast launched Feastables, he faced a challenge of scale. How do you build an e-commerce infrastructure that can handle millions of concurrent shoppers, process transactions instantly, and maintain stability during massive traffic spikes? The answer turned out to be deceptively simple: Shopify. Here's what's particularly interesting from a technical perspective. Shopify has built what's become the #1 checkout platform on the planet. They've created a system called Shop Pay that's solving one of e-commerce's biggest challenges, cart abandonment. The data shows it's boosting conversions by up to 50%. If you're into growing your business, your commerce platform better be ready to sell wherever your customers are scrolling or strolling. On the web, in your store, in their feed, and everywhere in between, everything's unified in one robust platform. It's a perfect example of how infrastructure, when done right, becomes a competitive advantage. Upgrade your business and get access to the same checkout system that powers Feastables. Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/acognitive, all lowercase. Nobody does selling better than Shopify. So visit shopify.com/cognitive today. Shopify.com/cognitive. You like to optimize things. You've chosen the perfect credit card to maximize your travel points, and you always find the fastest route when you drive. Shouldn't you handle your charitable giving the same way? GiveWell spends 50,000 hours every year doing deep dives into different charitable programs to try to find the ways to do the most good for your dollar. GiveWell has now spent over 17 years researching charitable organizations and only directs funding to a few of the highest impact opportunities they've found. Over 100,000 donors have used GiveWell to donate more than $2 billion. Rigorous evidence suggests that these donations will save over 200,000 lives and improve the lives of millions more. It's easy to see why the Boston Globe called GiveWell the gold standard for giving. GiveWell wants as many donors as possible to make informed decisions about high-impact giving. You can find all of their research and recommendations on their site for free. You can make tax-deductible donations to their recommended funds or charities, and GiveWell doesn't take a cut. Go to givewell.org to find out more or make a donation. Select podcast and enter Econ102 at checkout to make sure they know you heard about them from us. Again, that's givewell.org to donate or find out more.
And when I think about sort of Democratic Party as usual, I mean, some people say it's like Obama, some people say it's like Pelosi, Schumer, there's sort of a nexus of power. What is sort of the equivalent on the Republican side? Like, what is Republican Party business as usual?
I mean, first off, to acknowledge, it was actually unclear whether President Harris would have been the Democratic Party as usual. I think both sides are perhaps seeing a slow motion succession failure. There's a reason all the very formidable Democratic Party politicians, except maybe Gavin Newsom is now still left and AOC, they're all old. Like Elizabeth Warren is getting quite old now compared to the peak of her career. Like in 6-7 years, she'll be like a Nancy Pelosi-like figure. And Nancy Pelosi is just elder statesman from the 20th century, just still pulling all the strings, kingmaker of who gets to be the Democratic Party's presidential candidate. So I think that the Republican Party side, it's sort of, you could imagine some people like maybe Rand Paul doing something interesting, but outside of Trump himself, there's shockingly little. Let's put it this way. The most interesting right-wing political figure right now is center-right, is like Elon Musk. The second most interesting one is Donald Trump. And I almost don't care who number 3 is. I don't think they're there. It's sort of like maybe the Mavericks, right? The people like literally Tulsi, RFK, but none of those people are going to get confirmed. It's not looking currently like they're even going to try to get them through. So personnel is policy. And I think if one were to pursue this for real, I think what one is really doing is trying to recruit, first trying to be your own ostensible political allies so they allow the appointment of true outsider talent. Number one. Once that is done, use the outsider talent to actually key chunks of the administrative state, because the real power in the United States lies in the administrative state, not in the elected office. It's very telling, for example, that, when I talk to my conservative friends, they're convinced Joe Biden was not running the country. But as soon as Joe Biden leaves the seat and Donald Trump enters it, they are convinced Donald Trump is running the country. Maybe the country's not run from that seat. Maybe it hasn't been in decades. And, maybe that sounds like, to my conservative friends, that sound like cold water. to my liberal friends, that sounds like a fresh hope. The resistance isn't going to be like as loud, and people will play on the Republican team now, right? So previously the resistance was almost explicitly Democratic Party coded. There was the never Trump stuff, but it was the Democratic Party restraining Donald Trump. It was the sort of left side. And I think currently the right side is going to be constraining Donald Trump. And then as soon as you have party infighting in a populist context, that gets very tricky. You can say that this person is like, not actually a loyal Republican. You can pull your support from them running in the race. But that doesn't mean you can put your own candidate to win that constituency. Let's think about things like midterms. So you can have a disloyal ostensible ally if you try to replace them in their elected position for the purposes of pushing them to agree to the confirmations. They would just be replaced by a Democrat.
Yeah. Fascinating.
It's actually like the game theory is not that clean. And, perhaps, and this sounds just kind of funny, but it's kind of expensive. It's sort of like if you wanted to have, say, a proper tech takeover of the United States, and I was Elon, I would open this fund and I would go to all of my friends who are now they're congratulating me for my genius. They're all down for it. They're wearing the MAGA hat. They're saying nice things about Trump. They're excited to go to Mars. And you're like, oh, this is so good. Will you pledge $2 billion or $500 million to this fund I'm creating? And this fund's purpose is literally to go around and buy Republicans from their old donor base.
Fascinating.
Get them off their old donor base. Like literally targeted bribes.
You were dropping too much interesting ideas. You got censored.
You got immediately canceled. Yeah.
Yeah, you were saying targeted bribes.
No. I would just say be an alternate constituency, right? Be alternate funders of political campaigns. Be alternate lobbyists. Just raise, let's say, $40 billion or $20 billion. Sounds like a lot of money, but $20 to $40 billion to buy the Republican Party, I guarantee you no one has attempted that. At the end of the day, there's a question, well, why shouldn't Elon fund it? It's like, well, he already spent $44 billion buying Twitter. And, clearly this did not seem like a great financial choice at the time. Now, perhaps it'll turn out to have been a great financial choice. I guarantee you it would not have been had the Democratic Party won this election. So you want to do this so that people are committed. And, it's not like the other team ever had difficulty raising $10 or $20 billion donations from Silicon Valley. People, once they put their name and money on the line, cannot walk it back. So that's a big deal. Like, that's a big deal. Basically, you want other people to stake on your team. So to, basically provide what I think would be a winning strategy for a proper fast growth US, I think the solution is to have all of the fair weather Trump enthusiasts among Silicon Valley elites commit a significant amount of money to a fund, and the fund is used to lobby establishment Republicans and wean them off their pre-existing donor base, because their pre-existing donor base is tied basically to the paper belt, right? We might not think of Wall Street as the paper belt, but it kind of is. And Wall Street, Raytheon, and so on, the classic defense industry, even parts of sort of oil, right? I think this kind of has to be done. That would be one possibility. There are other ways, but I think that's the best one. I think the carrot might work better than the stick, because the stick is, Trump denounces you and you lose the election. Well, if you do that to me, then my seat goes to the Democratic Party. So it's like a very limited strategy.
Yeah. One thing Elon is good at doing is putting pressure on, he's good at a lot of things, obviously, but, raising money, evangelizing, and putting pressure. So I suspect if Republicans are acting out of line or really trying to sort of thwart him, he will put them on blast in a way that perhaps...
I mean, Donald Trump was never bad at that either, but we saw what the first administration was like. It was a constant sort of like trying to work with establishment figures who 3 months later inevitably betray him. And then all of the Trump supporters inevitably telling me that this is actually brilliant and was the plan all along, and that the next one's going to be different. There were just 4 years of that. Did people forget?
Yeah. But Trump didn't own Twitter, and he's not Elon.
That's true.
Yeah, obviously.
He could get Trump could get banned from Twitter. Elon cannot get banned from Twitter. And, Trump doesn't get banned from Twitter now either.
Yeah. And also the social, Zuck complimented, Trump, and, it seems like even the social networks, or at least Meta, is not beholden to the Democrat Party anymore. Maybe Google still is. I don't know. But it's a new sort of battlefield there. It's a new digital sort of space, and we'll see what that means.
Well, I do think that the digital space and the popular support are important, and controlling perceptions is important. However, I want to point out that, the New York Times is still there. Harvard is still there. The administrative state is still there. I think there is a post-election high, but I don't think it's going to last. I think that the messiness of this politics is going to show that there's a limited amount of things you can achieve with populism, right? At some point, you cannot just pressure every single Republican lawmaker and party operative. You have to have your own people. You have to have people who are loyal to you. And that is not the current Republican Party. Now, from the Democratic Party side, from the left-wing perspective, this is sort of good. Turns out the real checks and balances in the American system was internal party fracturing. Maybe the US can't really have a one-party state, left or right, because too many people defect on their own team all the time. In China, they have to use pretty extreme measures to get the CCP to stick to itself. But I do feel that the challenge of governing a country after one has achieved sort of the populist success, the first step is securing control of the administrative state. And then only after you have really the step of properly shrinking it, right? I feel like first you have to have control, then you can maybe shrink it. And I just think that there is, in theory, a good opportunity to do that over the next 4 years. And I would honestly be excited to see it, because I think the US government kind of needs a partial reform and reset of its key institutions. Like, all of the regulations gone too far, and the ambition's gone out of government. It's been a very long time since anyone was excited to work in government. So maybe there's an opportunity to do that, but it involves the transmutation of popularity into basically legal power, and essentially like just having the people who want to do the work for you. Like if you're paying someone a salary to do a job and they're just passively kind of sabotaging your policy agenda, well, that's a big problem, isn't it?
Yep. It is worth, because we're talking about populism, and you started the conversation by talking about there's left-wing populism too, and you mentioned Chavez, et cetera.
I mean, in the United States, AOC I would qualify her as left-wing populism.
Yes. But left-wing populism is about sort of the government doing things for you, where it seems like this populism is, I don't want to say it's libertarian necessarily, but it's like, get wokeness out of our schools, get the trans stuff out of the schools. It's sort of like, it's somewhat like, get this sort of like, get out of our spaces, basically. Let us live our life. It's like, let us sort of, not be blind, sort of gaslit or something. It's like a reactionary populism, basically. But it doesn't seem to be asking handouts in the same way, right?
Well, there's like a few differences here. It's sort of like, in a way, a direct handout is perhaps more politically powerful than getting out of someone's way, because they are directly dependent on you.
Yep.
And in the other one, you are protecting them from a plausible danger from the other side or from someone else to meddle in their affairs again. And I think people are more grateful for an existing dependency than they are afraid of, meddling that hasn't yet materialized. I think that politically there's a difference, but the key similarity is that you're trying to build like vast popular appeal. You're trying to build popular appeal for a measure and bring popular opinion as a form of pressure, mostly on elected officials, but even, for example, on companies, like boycotting concrete companies, right? Concrete companies fearing bad PR. And finally, also just sort of social pressure, because no one likes to be unpopular. Even if the public has no direct mechanism to remove you from your position, if they really dislike you, you're going to try to work on your PR just because it'll be unpleasant to be the head of a university or a school or a federal agency or whatever exposed to that. And you might be closed opportunities in the future because of it. I think this sort of like difference this more libertarian strand, like what I worry about it is that it's trying to achieve a vacuum. And I think that if you say, let's say, what would it even mean to get wokeness out of schools? Does that mean like firing 80% of academics? Does this mean that people would be happy to not send their kids to college because there are now fewer colleges? Or does it mean that you fire 80% of quote unquote woke people, and then people who are from the same social class, educated with the same degrees, have the same opinions, but now know to shut up about them for about 4 years, get hired in? And sure, maybe, your daughter or son has like a slightly less left-wing college experience, and you're a little bit happy about that as a conservative parent, but don't we just end up at the same spot? You would have to fundamentally like shrink the number of people going to college, for example, or you would have to figure out, hey, what does like a right-wing university exist? Like, how can someone make a career out of being like, I don't know, like a free market guy, for example, or being a pro tech guy in technology studies or whatever in the university, and that be a good career move, and that'll promote them up, and someday they'll get to teach at Harvard, because then they'll spend their entire intellectual career doing that, right?
This was Curtis Yarvin's critique of Chris Rufo's activism against critical race theory, where he was saying, hey, you can outlaw critical race theory, but people are still going to believe the same thing. They'll just call it something else, and they'll find ways to espouse it. But I wonder if the difference here is, Democrats just get lost. They lost the popular vote. And I think there's consensus that, wokeness is not working. And so maybe there'll be internal pressure to stop sort of conceding to sort of, maybe Nicole Hannah-Jones has way less power than she used to have, or way less sort of credibility. And people will say, hey, like even internally on the Democrat, like, we don't need to listen to this. And maybe that will sort of, ooze out to people.
Well, this election as a means to reform the Democratic Party, I think might just work. But that's very different from what I think people talk about by default. No, I would totally agree with you that within the Democratic Party, I think marginally the faction that supports the most, the deepest push for cultural war, I think that faction's been disempowered. I think like the anti-crime, more socially moderate one has some advantages. I don't think that the big government one has been like really disabled within the Democratic Party though. So it's sort of like, imagine like Gavin Newsom, big government, but now it's like this now with 50% less crime. It's like, I can't believe it's not butter. This sort of rebranding where it's like, oh, what we really want is like, clean streets and a clean environment. And, we're going to make America cities like thrive, et cetera, et cetera. Now, if they actually did that in California, that's actually a solid argument for the presidency. It's not clear that's going to happen, but I don't think that the Democratic Party is moving away from managerialism or from the administrative state as the means to implement policy. Like, does that make sense? I'm like evaluating it from this, like, kind of like from the, hey, I want people to leave me alone perspective. And they're like, well, we're not going to leave you alone, but the things we're going to tell you to do are going to be less onerous, right? So see, that's the kind of reform I expect on the Democratic Party side.
Right. Well, it's interesting because and I'm not sure if we've talked about this before, but there's sort of the Noah Smith, Ezra Klein, Derek Thompson, sort of like abundance, leftism movement, which to me kind of seems like conservatism in a way, or at least free market, like what they're, they want to deregulate housing. They want to, what they call supply side liberalism. but basically, deregulation, housing. They want to get rid of sort of laws that prevent us from being able to build. They want to free up sort of the building. I guess they would say they want to, increase state capacity or industrial policy, just like much more effective government. And they want to focus on this, healthcare, et cetera, as opposed to some of the culture stuff, because they realize that they're losing on the culture stuff.
I think that's like in a way promising, but I feel that's a very intellectual and coherent response. And then the question is, who is the power base within the Democratic Party that backs this? Like I could see like, say, a pragmatic Gavin Newsom sort of embracing Andrew Yang as his like idealist side, right? And then like it may be inviting Noah Smith to write a policy paper. But then as soon as Noah Smith is like inconvenient, I imagine Gavin Newsom like dropping him in an instant. What? Never knew you.
Hey, I could see Dustin Moskovitz, Reid Hoffman. I mean, these are, technocratic.
Okay. Yeah.
Increment, utilitarian, sort of pragmatic to some degree. And so I could see them getting behind such a thing. I think one question I have is, does it have voter appeal?
But Erik, that would be still technology entering politics, just technology entering politics on the Democratic Party side, which arguably was sort of attempted in different ways by, basically by Bill Gates, Eric Schmidt, again, Reid Hoffman, so on. The Hoffman seems extremely motivated primarily by an anti-Trump agenda rather than a let's make the Democratic Party work agenda.
Yeah. And I'm a big fan of Reid's.
Dustin Moskovitz is a good suggestion, because we know for a fact that, he has donated huge amounts of money, which is very admirable for something he believes in. Even if one disagrees with what he believes in, I think that it's like he has basically, if someone is willing to give a lot of their personal money to reshape society, like I almost think that's legitimate, actually. It's like you're putting, it's skin in the game, right? Like if you have like $20 billion and all you do is tweet, I probably shouldn't take your tweets that seriously. If you have $20 billion and you give $1 billion and create a thing called the Open Philanthropy Foundation, and you hire the smartest nerds you can find to like prevent the AI apocalypse, look, I can respect that. There's no bullshit. I just believe you that you actually think this is extremely good for society. So I don't know. I think that there is something there, but I think someone would have to seize the narrative and say, hey, we lost because the people want cheap electricity, they want abundance, they want clean, safe streets. And on top of that, we can, of course, have all of this classic progressive policies. You want to have a welfare state? That's great. We'll fund it through exports. We'll fund it through cheap energy. We'll just grow enough, right? And in a way, that was kind of the Bill Clinton promise. If you think about it, the modern Democratic Party is way less technocratic, way less pragmatic, way less interested in economic growth than, say, the Bill Clinton era one was.
Yeah. Yeah. That's really interesting.
But I think we need kind of a tech live player to organize, let's call it the tech left, even though calling it the left almost implies that it's progressive. Let's organize the tech liberals to pursue this agenda and just actually deliver on these goods. Because I think if they delivered on these goods in California, look, the rest of the country would want to be California. The Democratic Party has a state where they have free reign. They should use it. They should make it the most desirable place in the US. And I guarantee you other politicians will then run on, hey, our state should be just like California. Currently, they're running on, our state will never be like California. Thank goodness.
Yeah. If you had to guess what the candidate looks like in 2028 on the left, or the archetype of the candidate, what would that guess be?
Okay, I think AOC with kids is actually an extremely potent political candidate. Here's a vision of the future. I'm just telling you, Erik, what I think could work.
You're the messenger.
Yeah, don't shoot the messenger. So AOC has like 1 or 2 beautiful children. She shows up in happy photo ops. She says how after, the Trump election, she really listened to all those podcasts people recommended. And she realized that the establishment was out of touch And you know that Americans, like, you know, Hispanic Americans and white Americans and everyone, right? What we really need, what we really, really need is to have an America where, you know, families can be prosperous again. Working class families can be prosperous. Okay. And then that rhetoric, I think it can just literally do her entire agenda. You could just do, you know, the Green New Deal or whatever after, and no one would stop you. I think people very fundamentally respond to the optics. And I think AOC in the public's perception is almost a single woman. But if the AOC in the public's perception is a married mom, then I think she's conservative enough to win. Okay, I think the first woman who's going to be president in the United States will be a conservative, socially, like personally conservative woman. She'll like seem like a family woman. She'll have to push a little bit. So I'm not a stay-at-home mom, but I am a mom. I'm a family woman. My family is the most important thing to me, and I'm here to protect your family. I'm not your HR lady. I'm a concerned mom.
Why do you think that would have more appeal than like a Josh Shapiro or something, like, or more, you know, centrist?
Well, I think AOC is the most charismatic Democrat. And the second most charismatic Democrat is Gavin Newsom, who's a shark, but you kind of have to run a dark Brandon style campaign. You have to run a like dark Newsom. It's like sort of like, oh, you know, their guy is crazy, but our guy is sharper. Our guy can beat him in debate, and he's going to protect the excellent people doing good work by being absolutely ruthless. And look at him, he's so competent. And again, the optics are just, you know, say what you will, but the photo op of Gavin Newsom's family with the dog is just like beautiful, right? The core thing here is that I think Americans want to feel a personal connection with their like head of state. And I think that's very normal in all of human history. People have wanted to feel a personal connection with their head of state. I think it makes us feel safe. I think on a subconscious level, all humans are really terrified of government.
Yeah.
And you know, if the king or the czar or the pharaoh is the father of the nation, well, then I don't need to be that scared. This is my dad, right? He's going to protect me on a subconscious level. And, you know, the reason, you know, I don't know, Erik, like in terms of pure charisma, not who you agree or who you like, but in terms of pure charisma of the current field of Democratic Party politicians, elected officials, is there anyone who's in the same category as, let's say, AOC? And then maybe Gavin is more like a slick politician. It's not quite charisma, but it's so practiced and so done perfectly. He feels like, you know, a high, like if we ask ChatGPT, generate a California Democratic Party president, like what did they look like? I think it would probably generate something close to Gavin Newsom. Like optically, he just looks that way.
Yeah. I don't know if could there be a Trump of the left? Like, could Mark Cuban or someone like that come out of nowhere and, you know, build an audience? I mean, maybe because the Republicans are.
Well, I think they would have to have a social media following.
Yeah, of course.
Right. And that's why, again, sorry, I hate to bring it back to AOC, but AOC does do the social media game super well. I think behind Donald Trump, second most skilled person at social media.
Yeah, Cuban's not bad, but he's no AOC.
Exactly. But maybe he'll get better, right? Like people can get skills. And I do think, like, for example, there's this whole generation of, if I have to predict what the next generation of Democratic Party politicians will come, I think it's after the baby boomers all depart. I think that you will see a sudden upswing in millennial social media personalities running for office. I think we might yet come to see the influencer era of congressmen. So, but I expect that's more like 10 years out, because the gerontocracy in both houses is just very severe. It's still getting slightly older every year, but that can only go on for so long. Like the current incumbents will just, you know, nature will take its toll.
Yeah. Maybe as a last question, do you think blue cities will now be more empowered to sort of be a bit more conservative or a bit more hardlining now that we shifted a little bit?
I think so. I think some mayors will take the opportunity to end up running their cities in a very different way.
Yeah, that makes sense. Is there anything yet covered in this conversation, or maybe as any last points?
I think that we have seen populism emerge as a phenomena in the last decade because traditional media has been bypassed. In fact, this was a phenomena of the internet. It will continue to be transformed by the internet. So minor changes in what happens to TikTok, what happens to X.com, what happens to Facebook and Instagram, what happens to YouTube moderation policies, these will have a disproportionate effect on the success of the populist strategy. The populist strategy is essentially gather a lot of attention first, public attention first, public support second, convert that into offices and positions of power. This is what allows party outsiders across the Western world to enter into politics. It's the same in Italy, Britain, Poland, the United States, and so on. And populism is a strategy in this sense, in this narrowly defined sense, where we're not saying this is small government or this is socialism, because each of those, depending on how you frame them, both of them actually have a lot of popular appeal. Like if you look at general opinion polls, you can slightly rephrase how you are in favor of this or that policy, and it swings 60% vote, 60% of the population either way. So what I think we're going to see in the Western world is this question of, can we survive live players entering into politics and being in constant friction with the administrative state? Is this the new balance of power where it's productive and where these states actually become better and more agile? Or is this a transition period between one form of administrative state to another? And left or right, eventually people will have to embrace, let's call it the EU approach of just censoring the internet until the populists go away and let the insiders run their things the way they have run them. To be clear, I don't think that would work super well, but I'm not convinced the constant bumping and friction between, we can almost call it a deep state if we want to. Let's call it a deep state and populist upstarts empowered by social media. I don't think this works very well. So I think we're struggling to find a model of digital democracy that actually works. And perhaps the digital democracy procedure software in the minarchist version, maybe it can replace the administrative state. But then you need a deeper vision of reform. You need a new political economy. You cannot just be using the will of the people as this constant mobilized check on the administrative state. Because when the people aren't paying attention, the administrative state just does what it does. And they're by default sort of your enemies. So we need to find a new political harmony.
Yeah, that's a fascinating note to end on. Samo, this has been a great discussion. As always, until next time.
Till next time.
Hey everyone, Erik here. Ever wondered how the biggest names in tech turn pricing into their secret weapon for explosive growth? Well, I've got a new show for you that pulls back the curtain on the real levers of SaaS pricing. It's called Unpack Pricing, hosted by Scott Woody, who is the co-founder and CEO of Metronome, a usage-based billing platform powering billing for OpenAI, Anthropic, and Databricks. In each episode, Scott sits down with founders, executives, and pricing experts to break down how they use pricing to grow their business and drive revenue growth. You'll hear from founders like Spencer Kimball of Cockroach Labs on the realities of monetizing open source software, and from product and pricing leaders like Jesse Miller on navigating both product-led and sales-led growth. Whether you're a startup founder, product leader, or trying to acquire an edge in your understanding of tech business models, Unpack Pricing delivers insights you won't find anywhere else. Subscribe to Unpack Pricing, available wherever you get your podcasts. Head to the link in the show notes now.